Let me tell you a story first. Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Not a full story, a super brief version. You see, at the end of the Han Dynasty, China is divided after the government is weakened. The warlords are everywhere, fighting each other to fill up the power vacuum. It's chaotic beyond our imaginations. As I mentioned, in any environment, some are going to thrive, some are going to perish. Three warlords eventually defeat enemies around them and established three powerful kingdoms. They reach a balance. No one is powerful enough to defeat the other two. This balance remains for decades. The Three Kingdom era is a fascinating time, kind of like the medieval time in Europe. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this book, makes it even more fascinating. The story is very popular in China, Japan, and Korea. One of the reasons is that the book provides lots of memorable characters and a deep observation of how our society works. And because this book is what most people know about this era, so what I'm telling you now is based on this book, not the real history. Like always, the real history is boring. So let's check out these three kingdoms briefly. On the surface, the Three Kingdoms have very different styles. The leader of this one at the north, Cao Cao, is pretty much a dictator. He makes all the decisions, and sometimes he kills people for petty reasons. He's a few steps away from a tyrant. The leader of this one at the west, Liu Bei, is almost the opposite of Cao Cao. He hires a guy named Zhuge Liang and pretty much let him run the kingdom after that. The leader of this one at the east, Sun Quan, is somewhere in between. Cao Cao's kingdom is the most powerful one, with a bigger territory and a bigger population. The other two are less powerful but not weak. So the three kingdoms kept a balance. No one is powerful enough to defeat the other two, which means even though they have different styles, but the three systems all work greatly. They all have a strong military, and to support military, they all have a strong economy. But if we stop focusing on the styles, we'll see the core mechanisms of all the three kingdoms are exactly the same. Like I mentioned, the book provides lots of memorable characters. There are three categories. The first category, the leaders, Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan. The second category, powerful warriors, or champions. In the book, they are also called generals because they also lead armies. This is a story that happened 1800 years ago. The fighting style back then was different. It's more ancient style. For example, they have to face duels all the time. If the champion on the other side calls for a duel, you cannot refuse. Many characters are killed in duels in this book. The third category, smart people, or strategists, or consultants. They don't fight in a battle. They give advice to the kings before a battle, or they help the kings run the kingdom. Or they do both. The characters that belong to the second and the third category are all called talented people in the book. And the three kings all focus on finding talented people in their kingdoms and hired lots of them. When you read the book, you'll notice that there are plenty of memorable characters in all the three kingdoms, and that they are all loyal to their kings. One character actually is famous because of his extreme loyalty to his king Liu Bei, even though Liu Bei is the weakest one at the beginning of the story. So the three kingdoms all have the same structure. The king is at the top, the talented people are in the middle, and the rest of the people are the foundation. Is that familiar to you? Think about a typical kingdom in the medieval time in Europe. The king is at the top, knights and the consultants are in the middle, and the rest of the people are the foundation. Only a priest is a special element in the Europe kingdom. There are no priests in Chinese-style kingdoms because the government absorbs the functions, and the Confucianism makes sure that people don't need to be watched all the time. Although the priests have a very complicated relationship with the kings, they are not loyal to the king per se for one thing. They still have the same function as the knights and the consultants in the kingdom. So I'm going to put them into the same category. What you see seems like a stratification. That's how we interpreted our society for a long time. But that's not the core mechanism. The core mechanism is specialization, or division of labor. Right people for the right jobs. This is the secret why these three kingdoms are the final winners of the Civil War and able to stand against each other for a very long time. They all reached a very high level of specialization. Specialization is the natural result of the laws of thermodynamics. The benefit of a specialization is crystal clear. By focusing on some specific tasks, people will be able to do the tasks with high energy efficiency. For example, you are a carpenter. You've been learning from your master ever since you were 10 years old. Carpentry is the only thing you know. After 15 years of learning, you become a master. You understand the nature of wood better than anyone. You know how to reshape it or bend it precisely with only a slightest chance of a failure. So when you make, let's say, a dinner table, you use the least material, you will have the least chance to fail, and you will spend the least time to get the job done. That is what specialization is all about, energy efficiency. A society that runs on high energy efficiency has the better chance to survive. That's how our world evolved for millions of years. The high-level specialization that happened in the Three Kingdoms was one of the offshoots of Confucianism. I don't think it's something intentional. China has been under the heavy influence of Confucianism for at least 300 years when the Three Kingdom era began. When Confucius described how a society should work, he used the 8 Chinese characters, so let's call it the 8-character principle. 君君臣臣父父子子. It's easy to understand. 君 means leader, like kings, queens, or emperors. 臣 means the managers the king hired to run the country. 父 means father, 子 means child. The second repeated character is a verb, so put together, it means a king should behave like a king. A manager should behave like a manager. A father should behave like a father. A child should behave like a child. The core mechanism of the 8-character principle is specialization. Right people for the right jobs. A king should learn how to do his job and focus on it. A manager should follow the king's orders. The father and the son part is the training that happens in families. A father should guide his children. A child should follow his father's orders and guidance. Europeans have been following the same principle with different styles, but the core mechanism is the same. A king should just lead, making all the important decisions for the kingdom. A knight should always be loyal to the king and do whatever the king asks him to do. Loyalty is always the key element in knighthood. If the king orders him to charge, he charges. If the king orders him to retreat, he must retreat. Everyone should only focus on his own profession and master it. When you form an organization, it's a sum of all the max power. Specialization is how our society gains high energy efficiency. For example, imagine one day you have a strong headache. Usually, if you rest for a while, the headache would go away. But not this time. After 2 days, the headache is still there, persistent. You begin to realize something is not right. It's time to visit a doctor. You go to the hospital. After the examination, the doctor hesitates to tell you the result. It seems he's troubled. That makes you nervous. The doctor instead calls in another doctor and asks his opinions. The other doctor is also troubled by the data. They begin to think that you probably have some serious disease and you are scared already. For 3 hours, the 2 doctors conducted more examinations on you. Then they searched online and discussed what they found. You even see them having an online meeting with some other doctors. After another 3 hours, the 2 doctors finally are confident enough to draw the conclusion. They tell you that the headache is caused by a combination of a genetic mutation and the infection of a virus. The mutation makes your body vulnerable to this specific virus. So far, only 200 cases were found in the whole world. But the good news is that this disease is easy to deal with. The two doctors then ask you if you are willing to participate in further studies. All you have to do is to visit them every month and go through some examinations. You take a moment to think, and you say yes, if the studies can help other patients. Okay, now let's go back to the beginning of this story. When you realized that something was wrong, why didn't you go outside and ask some random strangers for medical advice? It seems like a dumb question, but it points to one of the most serious problems of our society. You didn't ask random strangers because they were not professional, but the doctors in the hospital are all professionally trained and verified by the society. The modern medicine is now improved significantly, benefiting from the advancement of modern science, including physics, chemistry, biology, physiology, genetics, virology, and pathology, etc. This glorious advancement gives people great confidence that the doctors know what they are doing. It's not guaranteed that the doctors always know what to do with any diseases. There are still lots of incurable diseases, but the doctors provide the best chance. Now, answer another question. Are you going to ask some random strangers about how your country should be running? Remember the question I mentioned in the chapter 12 about which one is more complicated, a mug smashing on the floor or a society. A society is a zillion times more complicated. A society very likely is the most complicated thing in this universe. So why do we believe that average people's opinions matter? True democracy is the equivalent of asking random people in the streets for medical advice. It's actually worse than that. The random people are able to give you some good advice, like, why you ask me? Go see a doctor, you pinhead. But the random people would never give you rational advice like this if you ask them about the inflation or foreign policy or how to control the corruption. They would have strong opinions on all these super complicated issues, like they are experts. That was the reason Plato didn't trust democracy after Socrates was sentenced to death by public votes. Instead, Plato suggested that a nation should be led by a philosopher king. Confucius suggests a similar idea. A nation should be led by people who are morally perfect, which is another way to say the leaders should be specialized. Our society is just too complicated. Not everyone is capable of handling the super complicated information contained in it, let alone making decisions. The only possible solution is specialization. Let competent people handle this particular job. When we look at our history, we worship, or at least praise, the great leaders, like Queen Elizabeth I, or George Washington, or Tang Taizong, the second emperor of the Tang Dynasty. They were the great leaders because they made many right decisions. In such a case, people were willing to follow their orders. The organization would move like a single entity, creating a great force. That's how any organization should work. But since making the right decisions is extremely difficult, we only recognize a few names as the great leaders in our history. We wish we can have more, but they are as rare as the raining days in the desert. Most leaders are mediocre. That makes specialization even more important. It doesn't guarantee the right decisions, but it increases the chances. Monarchy has been the most stable system in great part of our history exactly because monarchs were specialized. Most monarchs grew up in royal or rich families. They were trained on running the country ever since they were little. They were specialized on negotiating with other monarchs, raising and training a strong army, using strategies in battles, making splendid buildings to induce a sense of superiority and boost morale, collecting taxes to keep the nation going, etc. All the tasks specific for leaders. Again, don't think about 100% efficiency. If the training can only improve the skills slightly, it's better than nothing. Monarchs were all specialized on leadership, so they had better chances to make right decisions for their nations or their kingdoms. At least better than random strangers in streets. Monarchy worked great for thousands of years. Then the Western world introduced the voting system, like it was some great new invention. It was not. When I was 8 years old, my parents bought our first television. So in a way, you can say that the children's minds in China back then were pure and primitive, without influence from the outside world. Guess what we did when a bunch of children couldn't decide which game to play? Well, we voted. The voting system is not something new or advanced. It's the opposite. It's the oldest and also primitive means to solve disputes among people. It's not a new invention. The truth is that the voting system is just a tool to handle the ocean effect when the population and the size of the economy increased in the Western world. That was the reason the Western world only borrowed the name of democracy but abandoned its core. It doesn't matter how you sugarcoat it, the democracy in the world right now is not a democracy at all. It's just a voting system, not a rule by the people. The core mechanism of the voting system is to exclude average people from making big decisions. Average people have no chance to win the election. It's a system that benefits rich people only, and it's a very clever trick. It's designed to deal with the two troublesome issues for the rich people successfully. The first one is physically impossible to make right decisions all the time for a society, especially a big society with a big population. It's also physically impossible to judge if a decision is right or not, which will cause lots of controversies and criticism in the society. It is the topic in chapter 12. If I forget it, let me repeat. The only way to judge if a decision is correct or not is to rewind the timeline, make it a different decision, then let the whole world run again. We don't have such technologies. Or even if we have such technologies, I don't think anyone on this planet would want to be used as a lab rat just to prove a point. The second issue is impossible to make everyone happy in a society, regardless of whether the decisions are right or not. People have different needs, different life experiences, so they choose different ways to live their lives. So how can you satisfy every one of them in a society, especially when we're talking about a huge population? These two issues became more obtrusive in the modern time when the ocean effect made everything more erratic and unpredictable, which means the leaders have greater chances to make bad decisions and face the consequences. People will be angry more often. The voting system mitigates the consequences by channeling the anger to the people who voted for the leaders. So the leaders, usually the rich people, won't be the only ones who will take the responsibility. Those who voted for the government also have to take the responsibility. The responsibility is dispersed and thinned out. And because it's always the majority who wins the election, it's always the majority who will take the blame. The minority will be unlikely to cause social turmoils, no matter how angry they are, because they are always outnumbered. Even if they cause some social turmoil, it won't be deadly. The minority's opinions will always be suppressed successfully, hence the social stability is increased. The voting system didn't really change the core mechanism of the Western world. The monarchs are gone or marginalized, but it doesn't mean the country is in average people's hands. The monarchs are gone, but the rich people were not affected because they are always winning the election. This is the extension of the old European tradition in a disguised form. The rich people still have better access to high-quality education. They are still growing up in the environment teeming with people who are specialized on making big decisions, such as business owners, high-rank managers, politicians, consultants, scholars, etc. Rich kids are affected by those people and trained to think big, to think like a leader. They are specialized on the skills that are essential for leaders, not dealing with paychecks like average people. And they always have the money and skills to win the election. This system worked great for a few hundred years during and after the Industrial Revolution. The Western world produced lots of geniuses and spearheaded pretty much all the advancement of modern science and technologies. Partially, that was the result of a high-level specialization. Everybody was releasing their max power. But the voting system slowly and gradually deforms specialization because winning election actually only has a very weak correlation with the leadership. It's more about how to raise and spend money, how to build image, and how to speak in public, not how to make right decisions for the country. After we entered the age of television and the age of the internet, talking became critical to the candidates. In the past, when we only had newspapers, the information was generated and analyzed by professionals or specialized people like journalists, reporters, and editors. Now, everyone is allowed to generate and analyze information, regardless of if they are qualified or not. Specialization has lost. Information has been cheap and flimsy. The brain ambrosia has found paradise. People still call it freedom of speech, but it's already developed into an orgy of brain ambrosia. All the politicians only adapt to the new environment, where blabbering oversimplified messages is the key to success. When people vote, they are literally voting for those who are good at talking, who are good at manipulating people's minds with the brain ambrosia. In the fierce competition, when talking is such an essential skill, the politicians have no choice but to hone those skills to the max level. People are voting for the best mind controllers, not the best decision makers. The consequences are that the specialization of the government is diminished. Its ability to see this world truthfully is lost. Its power of making good judgments vanished. Frequent election and re-election put great pressure on politicians and slowly became the only thing politicians have to worry. Richard Nixon was a typical example. Nixon definitely was one of the most visionary presidents in American history. People say only Nixon could go to China. It's true. Only visionaries like Nixon could make right decisions because they had better chances to see far ahead into the future, making more accurate predictions. Nixon sensed that China would be important to America in the future. As a hardcore anti-communism advocate, he visited the so-called communist China in 1972. The Chinese government back then treated America as a potential enemy because it was so-called capitalist. Nixon changed that. He single-handedly brought China closer to America and prevented China from turning into a true enemy. But even brilliant politicians like him couldn't escape the pressure of re-election. He committed crimes because of that and had to resign. The Americans lost the last competent leader. No more visionaries, only loudmouth talkers. One of the mistakes they made was that they seriously underestimated China for decades. That wasn't supposed to be a mistake for the competent leaders, not for decades. Under this kind of leadership, China became completely invisible to Americans no matter what happened there. China was just a heavily polluted and miserable sweatshop that occasionally provided a sense of superiority for Americans. They mistook a seedling for a blade of grass. Now Americans are completely confused, facing a big tree. And they will never be able to make right decisions until their leaders are specialized on leadership again in the future. China, on the other hand, followed a different style of specialization for thousands of years. The 8-character principle is just the beginning and the guideline. I mentioned endless times that China has always been huge. The government couldn't run this country in the Western style, which is more common. Because of its size and population, the government had to hire lots of managers. Running this country by rich people alone had worked in the past, but ever since the Song Dynasty, the government had no choice but open the door to all the people in China. As long as someone could pass the SAT, he was qualified to run this country. regardless of his background. But good self-control wasn't enough, of course. Lots of people who passed the SAT came from poor families. They had no access to any kind of education or training on running a country or being a leader. They had to be specialized. One of the most important methods for specialization was the rotation system that is still used today. This is how it works. For example, you work in the government of a small city, and you are the vice chief of the agricultural branch, one step away to the real chief. One day, luckily, you are promoted, but you are not going to be the chief of the agriculture branch. Instead, you will be reassigned to a new job in a new city. Let's say this time you will be the chief of the education branch in a different city. You have to move there and do a very different job. After a few years, you are promoted again. The whole process will be repeated. You will have a higher position in a new city. Sometimes the new location could be close to your home, sometimes it could be very far. When your position is high enough, you could be moved to literally anywhere in China. This is your career path in the government. You are always moving. Sometimes a few hundred kilometers, sometimes thousands of kilometers away from your home. And the government has a very strict standard to judge your performance. You get promoted only when your performance meets the standard. That's why, technically, there are no true politicians in China. A person is running the country not because he's charming, but because he's competent. This is a simplified version of this rotation system. In reality, it's way more complicated, but this simplified version is the gist of it. Let's see a real example. Su Shi was one of the most famous writers in the Song Dynasty and in the entire China history. And I quoted from his poetry in the very first chapter. This picture shows how he was moved around in China in his whole life. In his case, not every move was a promotion. Actually, lots of time he moved because of a demotion. That's why I said the reality is more complicated. Nonetheless, this is a typical example how Chinese government officials are specialized during their careers by the rotation system. Or maybe I should remind you that he was remembered as a writer and a poet, not a government official, because all the government officials in the past were writers and poets. People usually remember the best part of a person. For Su Shi, it was his poetry, but he actually was a competent and beloved mayor in the cities he served. For example, after he was banished to Hainan, he opened a school. His teaching greatly inspired the local people because back then, this tropical island was very poor and the education level was very, very low. Su Shi was the first famous person who stayed on this island for 2 years. Kind of like if you live in a small town, one day Edgar Allan Poe comes and lives there for 2 years. Imagine how excited you will be. That was the effect Su Shi caused back then. And the people are still memorializing him today for his contribution to this island. The benefits of the rotation system is very clear. The first one is that everyone has to start with simpler jobs, learning how to manage a small department, then gets promoted to run a bigger department. Then, if you did a great job, you have a chance to run a city, then a province, then the whole country. So it's a ladder that people can climb and slowly build their experiences. Incompetent people will be eliminated and stopped from going higher. The second one, by taking different jobs, everyone would learn different aspects of how the government works. They have a better chance to develop more comprehensive managerial skills. The third one is that by moving around, everyone would see the big picture of this huge and complicated country. Different regions in China are wildly different at the culture, language, food, economy, and potential. The high-rank government officials must get used to all the differences. More importantly, different regions have different problems. The officials must learn how to deal with them. They will be better prepared for higher positions when they are running a province or the entire country. The first one is that the rotation system is a way to test loyalty. You can, of course, refuse to accept the new assignment, for example, because you don't want to leave your family. That actually happens quite often. My mother was a policewoman. She never got promoted. One of the reasons was that she refused to leave her family for too long and too far. That usually means the end of your career. You are going to be stuck at where you are forever. That was what happened to my mother. She was a low-level policewoman for her whole life. If you don't want to pay the price, you would have no chance for promotion. Only those who are willing to pay the price would get promoted, and they will be very loyal to the system, and they would preserve the system's integrity. The fifth one is that by moving people around, they would have less chance to grow too powerful. That has been the most troublesome problem in China for thousands of years. Everyone who grew too powerful will be a threat to the central government. Again, it's a unique problem in a giant country because they could be anywhere in China. Imagine how the central government could even find out who was about to cause troubles in this giant country, where the messages could take weeks to reach the central government. So this rotation system probably was designed to solve this problem. Originally, all the other benefits were byproducts. Alright, this is the rotation system in China. Even though the people who pass the SAT are not specifically trained on running a city or the whole country, the rotation system compensated for that and specialized them for the jobs. Plus, those people already have good self-control. They tend to make more rational decisions. As the result, the government can achieve high level of specialization. Again, I mentioned it millions of times now. Don't think about 100% efficiency. Failure happens. If you are curious about their families, I have to say that the rotation system doesn't interrupt their families that much. Most people's family remain stable and strong. A friend of mine actually went through this process. She is a mother of two and originally worked in this city. Years ago, she was borrowed to Beijing because he did a great job in her position. After she worked in Beijing for a year, her superior decided to give her a chance to stay in Beijing permanently. It was a chance of a lifetime, jumping into the center of the power. She decided to take the chance and stayed in Beijing. After that, she would only come back to her family occasionally, sometimes at the weekends, sometimes on her vacations. But her families remained strong, like millions of similar families in China, that either the husbands or the wives were working in different cities. It's never a serious problem in China. Otherwise, this system would have been dead a long time ago. Based on this rotation system, the Chinese government has always been highly specialized, and China has always been a powerful country with a huge territory and a huge population. Whenever China is unified, a long peace and prosperity will last for hundreds of years until the energy efficiency was reduced by corruption, which is probably inevitable in any system. Like I mentioned, in any environment, some people will thrive and some people will perish. Given time, some people will slowly dominate the system at the expense of the poor people's suffering. When the poor people couldn't take it anymore, China will be in chaos. Then the loop will be repeated again. It's hard to tell what's going to happen in the future, how and when this new loop will end, or if there's a solution, or if it's even possible to escape the loop. What if the society is like a life form, death is inevitable? What if death is the only solution for the eternal paradox of change or not change? Or is the way we look at our history really meaningful? But these are not the questions for this video series. Maybe another time.